Okay, we got someone watching live from Holiday, Florida. Happy 2024. We are ready. We are pumped. We're good to go for a new year. Yes? Okay. So as always, tonight's class is in the memory of Yitzchak Tzvi ben Yosef, but it happens to also be that today's his yard site. Person who the class is extra special merit in his memory. Nachas in heaven and good things. Good evening, Michael. Good evening, Stan, watching us from London. Wow. Okay, Chaim. So we're going to talk about a bris later today, but we're going to start off. You know what they say: behind every good man, a better woman. There you go. Not a woman, even better woman. Correct. Behind every man is so smart. Yeah, Michelle's very proud of you, Steve. You definitely get brownie points for tonight. A plus. Okay. Right? Shalom from all over the world. Shalom from New Jersey, from Melbourne, Australia. Good evening to all of you. So behind every good man is an even greater woman or even better woman. That's the way it goes. So we know so much about one of the greatest Jewish men to live is Moshe Rabbeinu. The hero from this week's Torah reading, when we read about the birth of Moshe and how Moshe was circumcised, from basically this week, the birth of Moshe until the very last parsha of the Torah, which is V'zos HaBracha, with one single exception, which is a story of its own. There is not a single week, not a single parsha, when we don't talk and discuss and read about Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our teacher, the leader of the Jews, the hero of the Jewish people, the one that would communicate with God and bring God's message to the world. Seemingly in Judaism, there's very few people, if any, that can be considered greater than Moses. However, behind every good man is an even greater woman. So we're going to talk about a woman that nobody knows. A woman nobody knows. I mean, people know her name. They know her name, but that's basically what they know about her. With one or two exceptions in the Torah we'll talk about. I'll show you some fascinating medrashes, some fascinating midrash about her life. Some things I was studying on Shabbat. I don't have all the notes. I was reading through the Medrash on Shabbos, but I have it in my head. And some beautiful ideas, and most importantly, some very beautiful lessons for us from some modern-day Tziporahs. And really, I'm going to conclude with some stories how people can live the life of Tziporah, even if we're not married to the rabbi or married to the rabbi, etc. We'll talk about that, God willing. Okay? So let's start in the beginning. The beginning of the story is actually not Tziporah, it's Moshe. The Torah tells us how Moshe is born, and he's hidden in the basket, right, in the Nile. Who finds him? Batya finds him, the princess that went to go for conversion in the waters of the mikvah. Boker Tov from Melbourne. Good evening, everyone. Hello, Gail. So she takes him, she adopts him, she brings him to the palace and raises him as a prince, her son. He goes out one day, he sees the two men, Egyptian is killing a Jew. He kills the Egyptian. Eventually, this is the beginning of the story. And eventually Pharaoh finds out and he's going to be killed and he escapes and he runs away. Now the next thing the Torah tells us is that he arrives in Midian. It happens to be that there's a 40-year gap in between Moshe leaving Egypt and arriving in Midian. During that time, he ends up in a land called Cush. He becomes the king of this nation called Cush. Bilam, Ethiopia. Bilam, it's a fascinating story. I'm not going to say the whole story now because it's really not what we're talking about this week. Bilam leads a revolution against the king. He helps him. Anyway, eventually he leaves Cush and he comes to Midian. And that is where we're going to begin our story today. If you're watching it with me, you can look on the page from chapter 2 of this week's Exodus, chapter 2, this week's parsha. So in the pages you have. So the chief of Midian had 7 daughters. By the way, the mohel today, Rabbi Klein was a mohel, he has 7 daughters. I didn't think about that, but I should tell him, yeah. Yes, he has okay. So the chief of Midian, I'll message him after the class. He has him and Yisro have something in common. So the chief of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water, and they filled the troughs to water their father's flock. So here we are introduced to the 7 daughters of Midian, of Yisro. But what happens? All the girls are coming to Rivka and all that. But The shepherds came and drove them away. So Moses arose and rescued them and watered their flocks. Let me stop for a second. Why did they chase them away? What's going on there? Why are the shepherds chasing away these poor innocent girls? What's the backstory of the story the Torah is telling us? So, by the way, again, I told you I was reading through all the Medrash on Shabbos, fascinating stuff. I read that they actually threw the girls into the well, and Moshe came and took them out of the well. Yeah, it's pretty awful. I mean, you can see a bunch of bored shepherd boys. Oh, here's a girl. Let's throw her in the well. Why not, right? Boys will be boys. The girls laugh for that. Okay, so they were abusing her. They chased her away. They chased the flock away. Basically, Yisro, and we're not doing a class on Yisro either. We did a class on him. But Yisro was once a very famous priest. And Yisro then, after trying out every different form of idol worship, came to recognize they're all false. They're all hocus pocus. There's only one true God. And he renounced all forms of idol worship. As a result of that, he became a person who was like an outcast of society, which is why no one was willing to even watch his sheep for him. And therefore, he had no choice but to have his daughters go and take care of the sheep, etc. Now, how old are these daughters? I will tell you, because you want to hear fascinating stuff, right? So, how old is Tziporah at this time? So I read two now, in Medrash, again, all different kinds of Medrash. One Medrash said that she was so young that in fact when she became pregnant, her pregnancy was invisible. And that's if you look in the Torah, it just says that she had a baby. It doesn't say she conceived and had a baby. By most births in the Torah, it says she conceived and she gave birth. And by Tziporah, it doesn't say she conceived. Just she had a baby. She was very young. Not younger than Rivka. You can't have a young, not young, but she was young. The Torah doesn't give us an age. But there's another fascinating Medrash. You guys ready for this one? You ready? You're holding a tea in your hand. But Tziporah is actually the twin sister of Batya. No. So Batya was the daughter of Pharaoh. And Tziporah was the daughter of Yisro. Now Yisro happened to once be, I forgot to say this part, Yisro was once the advisor of King Pharaoh. Him and Bilam, which is why Bilam ran away to Cush, which is a whole other story, which is why Moshe fought with him over there. Yisro and Bilam, he's a prophet, a sorcerer, we'll learn about him one day, were both advisors of King Pharaoh. They're both advisors. And then when Pharaoh was asking them, what should I do about the Jewish people? So Yisro said, don't do anything to the Jews. They're innocent. He defended the Jewish people. And because he defended the Jewish people, Pharaoh was angry at him, and he realized that my time is up. He was fired, basically. And he left Egypt in disgrace. He was, but anyway, so Pharaoh, before he had left Egypt, I didn't plug in my laptop. So Pharaoh hid, before he left Egypt, there were these two beautiful, beautiful babies that were orphaned and put up for adoption. Beautiful kids, like unbelievable. So Yisro found these kids, so he took one of the girls and they gave the other one to Pharaoh. So Batya, the adoptive mother of Moshe, and Tziporah, the adopted daughter of Yisro, were actually sisters. Sisters, yeah. Which would make her a little bit old. She was the same age as Batya, who had to be a little bit older than Moshe. Anyway, they were adopted at birth. They were found on the market, it says. They were like up for sale or up for adoption on the market. Unbelievably beautiful. Anyway, fascinating little tidbit of information over there. So, what? Sounds like a tomato. Okay. So anyway, so Tziporah was being attacked by these shepherds, and this was a daily occurrence. It wasn't like a one-time thing. Every day she would come, they would chase her away. Every day she would come, they would throw her in the pit. They were in the water. They would attack her. They would terrorize her, and they would give her a hard time. So today, this Egyptian man, Moshe, he's there. He sees an injustice being done to girls. Now, he doesn't know who they are, but Moshe is not a man that can allow an injustice to go unchecked. It goes against everything that Moshe believes in. It goes against everything that Moshe... So what does Moshe do? Moshe sees what's happening to them, and immediately Moshe is a man, just like when he saw the Egyptian taskmaster beating the Jew, and he leapt into action and killed the Egyptian taskmaster, so too over here. Moshe came and saved them. So verse 18 tells us they came to their father Reuel. Reuel is a different name for Yisro, same guy. And he asks them, why have you come home so quickly today? Normally it takes you a lot longer to get water for our sheep. So they replied, an Egyptian man rescued us from the hand of the shepherds, and he also drew water for us and watered the flocks. An Egyptian man saved us. What's his name? They don't know. Where did he come from? We don't know. He was dressed in Egyptian clothing. So he says to his daughters, so where is he? Why have you left the man? Invite him and let him eat bread. Now, let him eat bread is a reference to let him marry one of you. Yeah, it's a metaphor. Bread, what's bread? My daughter, let him marry one of you. And let me finish reading the text, and I'll tell you some more amazing medrash. Moses consented to stay with the man, and he gave his daughter Tziporah to Moses. Now, if you read this, it sounds like they all lived happily ever after. Before I go further, actually, let me go back. In fact, why was Tziporah called Tziporah? So one of the reasons why Tziporah was called Tziporah is because she ran after Moshe like a bird. Like chasing after something. She ran. Moshe left the well. She came home without the guy. Father says, you're nuts. The guy just saved you. Why don't you marry him? So she went running like a bird to go and find Moshe. That's why Tziporah means a bird. Tziporah is a bird. The word Tziporah in Hebrew is a bird. So she ran after him like a bird to bring him home. In addition, what do we use a bird for in Torah? Which kind of sacrifice specifically? When a home is covered in tzarat and leprosy, the way you purify the home is with the blood of there's two birds. One is slaughtered and you sprinkle the blood, and one is set free. So she cleansed the home like a bird that cleanses the home from tzaras. She cleansed the home of her father's home from idols. A third reason why she's called Tziporah is because she was so beautiful that just as you admire a bird for its beauty, remember, her and Bati were sisters. She was tremendously beautiful. I'm going to talk about her beauty a little bit later. She was called actually the class, the beautiful woman nobody knows. Then maybe more people will be watching. The beautiful woman that nobody knows. Anyway, so just as a bird is admired for its beauty, so was Tziporah admired for her loveliness, for her beauty. Okay. Now, we just read, sounds like a beautiful story, right? They live happily ever after, they get married, and all beautiful. However, it's actually not so happy, lovey-dovey at all. There's different versions of how the story goes. But here's the general story. Yisro was still loyal to Pharaoh. He's still loyal to the Egyptian king. He asks Moshe, who are you? Why are you running away from Egypt? What are you doing in Midian? So Moshe tells him, he killed an Egyptian taskmaster, he had to run away. When Yisro hears that, you know what Yisro does? He throws Moshe into a pit, into a prison, into a jail. He had a prison. I'm not sure why he had a prison in his backyard, but there was a pit in his backyard, and he throws Moshe into prison for killing this Egyptian taskmaster. Now, Tziporah was in love with this guy. She wants to marry him. But her father threw him into the pit. Can't argue with your father. Remember, it was a different time back then, not like today. Your father did something, that was the law. There was no discussion. So what does she do? Secretly, for 10 years, she is secretly bringing food to Moshe in prison. 10 years. Finally, 10 years goes by. She turns to her father and says, what do you think ever happened to that Egyptian man that we threw into the pit 10 years ago? So what do you mean? How could a guy survive 10 years? He's dead. He died a long time ago. So, but don't you know he's a Jew? He's not an Egyptian. Don't you know the story? And they knew he was Jewish. And Abraham in the fiery furnace, where God protected him and he survived in the furnace. Don't you know God does many miracles for the Jewish people? Maybe God did a miracle for him too. So he says, okay, let's go check. And so Tziporah goes, and he had no idea that she was feeding him for the last 10 years. He didn't know. So they go to the pit to check. Miracle! He's alive! He's alive! It's a miracle from heaven. And so he said, okay, he takes him out of the pit to get married. That's one story of how Yisro was so impressed with Moshe to allow him to marry his daughter. Now here's another story. Ready for another story? Yeah, that's right. Don't get away. I'll tell you this. Even if she gives it away, I'll still tell you the story. Other stories like this. A little happier of a story. So there was a special stick that Moshe had. Where we all know about the stick of Moshe, the staff that he used to do the 10 plagues that turned to a snake. He did the splitting of the sea. Where did this stick originally come from? What? Well, it came from God. That's true. How did he get it? So God originally gave the stick to Adam. When he sent Adam and Chava out of the Garden of Eden, God gave Adam a stick by which he could protect himself. Adam eventually gave this stick to his great-great-grandson, Shem, to Noach. Gave it to Noach. And Noach gave it to his son, Shem, who gave it to his grandson, Aver, who gave it to Abraham. And Abraham gave it to Yitzchak, and Yitzchak gave it to Yaakov. And Yaakov, when he went down to Egypt, he gave it to Yosef. No, to Yosef. Moshe wasn't alive. He gave it to Yosef. And then, when Yosef passed away, if you remember, I already told you that Yisro was an advisor of Pharaoh in the palace of the king. Yisro and Yosef lived in the palace at the same time. He was an advisor. He was an advisor of the king. So when Yosef passed away, Yisro took this stick from Yosef, even though it should have gone to the kids. I guess he stole it, and he took it. And he came, when he ran to Midian, when he's leaving, maybe he took it with him when he's leaving the Pharaoh's palace. He took it with him on the way out, a souvenir. He came, he put it into the ground. And he put it to the ground after he couldn't get it out. It got stuck in the ground, and he couldn't get it out. You ever heard the story of Arthur's fabled sword? Every story comes from Torah. Just so you know, this is a story that has an origin in the Medrash of the stick of Moshe. And of course, some guy read that Medrash and made it to the story of King Arthur and the fabled sword in the table or the stone, whatever. But this is a Medrash about Moshe's stick. And many people came and they wanted to marry Tziporah. As I said to you, she was very beautiful. We'll talk about her beauty again more later. She was a very beautiful woman, so beautiful like a bird. And Yisro would say to everyone, you want to marry my daughter? Take that stick out of the ground and you can marry my daughter. You can take it. And everyone will come and they would try and they would pull and they would push. They would pull rope. Whatever, nobody could get that stick out of the ground. Moshe comes to the backyard of his future father, and he comes to eat either after he was in the pit or separately, not related. If he went to the pit, and he sees the stick and he pulls it out casually, even though there was a contest. And Yisro sees him with the stick. He says, "How did you get the stick?" He says, "Oh, it was lying in the garden. I just took it out. It was almost like came up by itself." At that moment, Yisro realizes it's a very holy person, and that's who's going to marry his daughter. However, Yisro is also smart. And Yisro knows that Moshe is going to one day leave him. So it says in verse 21 that Moshe consented to stay with the man, and he gave his daughter Tziporah to Moshe. You see that verse 21? It's a very interesting way of talking about a marriage. Normally, how does marriage work? The man asks for the permission to marry the woman, right? And you get down on one knee and you give her a ring. Here, first, Moses consented to stay with the man. You see that? And then once he consented, then the father agreed to give his daughter Tziporah to Moshe as a wife. So what does Moshe consent to in order to merit to get the father-in-law to agree to give him his daughter? What do you have to agree to? Not 7 years of labor. What does he agree to? A few different opinions. One was that the simplest one, the easiest one to swallow, is that Yisro was afraid that Moshe would do what his forefather Jacob did. Jacob married Lavan's daughters, and then he ran away from Lavan without telling him. Or he was worried that Moshe would take the stick and go one day and redeem the Jewish people, go back to Egypt, go back to his family. So he says to Moshe, you can marry my daughter on condition that you do not leave here without my permission. You can only marry her if you promise to stay here forever. Which is why when Moshe will leave, he'll have to go get permission to leave. Okay? There's another medrash, another explanation, that actually Yisro says to Moshe, I know you're going to want to raise your kid as a Jew. I want my grandson to find God on his own. Just like Yisro himself wasn't raised with God. He found God. Like Abraham found God. I don't want you to force him to be a Jew. I don't want you to circumcise him. I want you to let him grow up on his own and to find God on his own. And Moshe agreed to that. Not that he would worship, but he would find God on his own. So anyway, he agrees, and they live happily ever after. Moshe is now a shepherd for his father-in-law. The girls don't have to go fight with the shepherds at the well. He goes himself, and the years go by, and we know the story that one of the sheep ran away. A beautiful, beautiful story. And Moshe chased after the sheep. We don't know the story. We did a class. We did 2 classes on Moshe. Maybe one day we'll do reruns. But so we talked about Moshe, the love that Moshe had for every single sheep. And that became why he was chosen by God to be the shepherd of God's people, how he chased after the sheep. It ran 3 days to a river. He said, you're so tired, you were so thirsty, let me carry you back. And that's when God appeared to Moshe at the burning bush. And God says, Moses, Moses. And he says, yes, go to Pharaoh, tell him my people go. Okay. 7 days, Moshe argues with the God at the burning bush. Moshe does not want to go back to Egypt. He made a promise to his father-in-law. He also didn't want to go back to Egypt in general. Eventually, he agrees. He comes back to his father-in-law. He gets permission. And Tziporah, who knew what she was getting into, decided, okay, let's go back to Egypt. Then you have to realize for Tziporah, she's taking a big risk over here. What did Tziporah lose in Egypt? Nothing. Nothing. She grew up her whole life. She's from Midian. Moshe is going for what reason? Because Pharaoh is enslaving the Jews. Pharaoh is torturing the Jews. And now, as they're Jews, I understand, but she could let him go. For her to go, it's still, just because God's told them to go, you have to still recognize and validate that for her it was a tremendous act of sacrifice. She's allowing herself to be in a position of danger. It's a risky journey, and she joins. But I'll tell you more than that. Not just she joins just several days after having a baby. See, if you read the Torah before, I didn't put the verse in, but Moshe had one child called Gershom. Doesn't say anyone had a second child. But she had a child. It says earlier, they got married and had a child. One child. Later, we're going to read, I'm going to go to the verses soon, when she comes back, etc., to Moshe, she has 2 children. When was the second one born, Eliezer? When was he born? Eliezer was born several days while Moshe was at the burning bush. She has a child. And so now that she has this child is when she comes to this is strange. Something is when she has this child, she comes to this is loose. That's when she starts traveling to back to Egypt with this child that is just been born. With your child has just been born. Okay, what happens next? So let's go share our screen for a second. If you're watching me on my page, we're going to share our screen. And let's see what happens with the traveling back. They're on the way to the inn. Okay, this is also chapter 4. They're on the way to the inn. In an inn that the Lord met him and sought to put him to death, Moshe to death. Okay, so Tziporah disagreed to go back with her husband to Egypt. They're traveling. They haven't gone to Egypt yet. And suddenly, I'm going to read the verse and I'll explain. And the Lord meets Moshe and tries to put him to death. So how does Tziporah save her husband's life? Let's just read the text and I'll explain it soon. So Tziporah took a sharp stone and severed her son's foreskin and cast it to his feet. And she said, for you are a bridegroom of blood to me. Then he released him. And then she said, a bridegroom of blood concerning the circumcision. That's pretty cryptic, huh? Yeah. So you got that story? I'll explain it now. Let me close a second. It's like reading Shakespeare. So let me explain to you this very interesting story. Here's what? Well, Google, we have a rabbi. We have Rashi. Truth is, Rashi explains the story. So what happens? So Moshe is traveling back to Egypt with his brand new baby boy that has not yet been circumcised because he'd just been born, and you can't circumcise a baby and travel because it's a danger to the baby's life. I will tell you there are other opinions that it's actually the first baby, because remember I told you that Yisro made his son-in-law swear not to circumcise the first child, so it could be it's the first child. But either way, Moshe is traveling with an uncircumcised baby boy. And then they come to the inn, and Moshe starts to make lodging arrangements for his first taking care of giving his son the circumcision. And God is, because Moshe, you're going to do what God told you to do. You're going to the divine mission. You should be first and foremost focused on. So if you're not focused enough to immediately give your child a circumcision, what does that mean? You don't truly appreciate the importance doing exactly the word of God. So God sends a serpent, a snake, swallows up Moshe up until the place of his circumcision, up to right below the waist. He swallows up and out. And then the serpent starts to swallow Moshe from his head up until the place of his circumcision and spits him out. Now, Tziporah is watching her husband be swallowed up by a snake. So what does she do? What would most women do if you saw a snake swallowing your husband? Try and kill the snake. Or you'd be screaming and shouting, standing on top of the table. Ah! Right? Instead, what does she do? She takes a sharp knife. She takes a sharp knife and she circumcises her own son. A stone, a sharp stone. I said knife, you're right. A sharp stone. She grabs the stone down. She thought it was sharp. She knew what to do. And she knew that this was because of the bris. She was able to talk to the fact that the snake was only swallowed. First, she screamed, Chassan damim atali, to her. You're a groom, makes your wife a widow. You're going to leave me alone. And then she takes the bris and she throws it at the feet, either the feet of Moshe being swallowed up by the snake, because now the snake was swallowing him up to, or she threw the bris at the circumcised. Different opinions. And after she threw the circumcision, the foreskin, then the snake released Moshe, because it was clear that Tziporah, no, explain a second why. And then she says, you are a Chassan Damim Atali, you are Chassan Damim Lemulot, because of the circumcision, that's why you almost were killed. It's clear to her giving the circumcision to her son on time. So you see from here the power of Tziporah. Because God saw that Tziporah would be, focused and be eager, and I'm looking for alacrity, to be very quickly focused on doing what God wanted to be done, that would keep Moshe in check, and that would make sure that Moshe will be properly and fully devoted to doing the mitzvot, doing the commandments of God in the proper way, right away, not wasting any time. What? I just said why, because he didn't have the circumcision. The boy, he was busy taking care of lodgings. He was swallowing Moshe because Moshe was busy. Yeah, but Moshe, instead of Moshe being focused on circumcising his son, he said he was worrying about his own lodgings, his own personal space. Okay. Fine, my friend. So this is the second time that Tziporah has saved Moshe's life. Second time she saved his life. That, she didn't know at first. She wasn't sure, but she actually, it says that the spirit of Ruach, I think you're asking the question, says that Ruach HaKodesh entered her at that moment. She had Ruach HaKodesh. She was like a prophetess, although she's not considered one of the prophetesses of the Jewish people. She had Ruach HaKodesh enter, divine intuition, divine spirit resting on her, and she knew that my husband was being small because of his circumcision. Now, I guess she knew that her own husband was circumcised. I guess she knew that already. So it wasn't his circumcision. So she circumcised her son. Okay. So now you would think, that's the end of the story, you would think that she continues a journey together with her husband, comes to Egypt, and she's together with all of her husband and all of the Jews in Egypt. However, although the Torah doesn't tell us anything, that's not what happens. The next time we hear about Tziporah in the Torah is right before the giving of the Torah. We're going to jump all the way to the book of Shmos, the book of Exodus, chapter 12, which is before the giving of the Torah. And here we read the following words. Oopsies. I showed the wrong thing. 1 second. So let's open this back up a second. So Moshe is the parsha of Yisro. How does the parsha of Yisro, which is the parsha of the Ten Commandments, begin? So the Torah tells us that Yisro heard all of the many wonders and the beautiful things that God did for the Jewish people. Chapter 18, sorry. And he heard all that God did for Moses and for the people taken out of Egypt. So Moses is father-in-law, Yisro. Moshe's wife, after sent away, I missed the verse, and her two sons. What do you mean after she was sent away? Who sent her away? The Torah says that the father, Tziporah's father, takes Tziporah and her sons after she had been sent away and comes to rejoin the Jewish people. How did that happen? So there's a fascinating brought in the Medrash. Rashi tells it to us that basically they keep on traveling, or according to one opinion, they met Aaron, which is why he was then punished, because one Tziporah, I'll tell you in a second, moving ahead. They meet Aaron, brother of Moses. God had told Moshe at the burning bush, you meet Aaron. And Aaron says to him, who are these people? So he says, my wife, my kids, meet your uncle Aaron. Aaron, nephew Eliezer. He's out of Egypt. We're trying to save them from the suffering and the bondage of Egypt. And you're bringing more Jews into Egypt. How does that make sense? It's a good question, huh? So Moshe agrees to his brother, and Moshe tells his wife, okay, you go back home. And so Tziporah leaves her husband with her kids, including a baby that had just been born a few days ago, still too young to be circumcised. That she just circumcised now with her baby after the bris. Her husband's going on a dangerous mission to go fight Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And she goes home with her kids by herself. And it would be over a year until the verse, at least, that we're going to read in the book of Parsha of Yisro, when after the exodus of Egypt, after the 10 plagues, after the splitting of the sea, that Tziporah and her children will finally be reunited with Moses. There is an opinion that the reuniting of Tziporah and Moshe happens even later, after the giving of the Torah, but that's not how Rashi tells it to us. So it's at least over a year, 15 months or so, that she's separated from her husband. While he's fighting for the Jewish people, she is by herself at home in Midian. Okay? So now she reunites with her husband. Now her husband's no longer a private individual, a shepherd who works from, I don't know what time shepherds work, not 9 to 5, probably like 5 a.m. to, I don't know, whatever time, But it was a very peaceful life in Midian. A shepherd is not a stressful job. You don't get phone calls in the middle of the night. There's no, you know what I'm saying? You put the sheep in the corral, you say goodnight, you go home, you relax, you hang out in the pasture. And now Moshe is directly and personally responsible for each and every Jew. We read how Yisro tells his son-in-law, he was judging the Jews from early in the morning till late at night, single-handedly. He wasn't going home. He was literally all day, taking care of the Jews. She was getting phone calls during the night. People were complaining. What? No work-life balance whatsoever. He was working nonstop because he was completely, absolutely, and totally dedicated to his people. Completely dedicated to his people. But that's not the full sacrifice of Tziporah. The sacrifice of Tziporah is much, much greater than just being married to a person who cared deeply for the Jews, who was teaching Torah day and night. So much so, I'll tell you, I'll say it in advance so you understand the story in time. A lot more with you still. I'm going to say it. So Moshe, based on the command of God, decides to completely abstain from any intimacy with his wife and to divorce his wife. Why? Before, God appeared to the Jewish people one time. He told the Jewish people, God told people to separate 3 days from your wife before the giving of the Torah. To separate from your wives 3 days, to go to the mikvah and purify yourselves and all that. I speak to God almost daily. Moshe spoke to God all the time, face to face. At any time, God would appear to Moshe. So therefore, he felt like he needed to be in a constant state of spiritual ready to receive the revelation of God's presence. And so therefore, he separates from his wife. They're not living anymore because he's busy with God. Now, what happens is, there's a story much later in the Torah, when the Jews complain to Moshe for meat, and Moshe says to God, I can't do this alone anymore, I can't. So God says to Moshe, let's make 70 elders to help you. How 70 elders? Each tribe is going to want equal representation in this groups. So if you have 12 tribes, each tribe should give 6 of their members to join the 70 elders. What's the problem? Math? 6 from each tribe. So 6 times 12 is 72. God said 70. Lottery. Humanity makes a lottery. 70 come up with the name, with the blank paper, or the other way around with the name elder, and 2 come up with a blank paper. The two are men called Eldad Umedad. Those are their names. Eldad and Medad are the two of the 72 that don't make cut or make the raffle to be elders, to be given divine prophecy, but they'd already experienced divine prophecy by being gathered in the group of 72. They already had prophecy. So Moshe leaves the camp together with the elders, where God is going to appear to them and instruct them to give meat to the Jewish people. While the 70 elders camp, these are prophesying. And Joshua here says to Moshe, destroy them. Moshe says, let all the Jews be prophets. That's what Moshe was doing, what Joshua was doing. But what was Tziporah doing? It says that the women were lighting candles of honor. These two men, the elders of the became prophets. And their wives are so lucky that their husbands are prophets now. Because everyone was out of the camp. So they were lighting candles in their honor. And Tziporah was standing next to her sister-in-law Miriam. And she says to her sister-in-law, they're celebrating for these men, I'm mourning for their wives. Woe to their wives. The Medrash is much more dramatic than what the Rashi quotes us over. The Medrash is very dramatic. I'm mourning for their wives. They're lighting candles, I'm mourning. Are you mourning? They're going to become holy, they're going to become spiritual, and they're going to do what my husband did. They're going to separate from their wives to be ready for divine revelation. Miriam heard this, so what does she do? She goes to tell her brother. Goes in the family WhatsApp group. In that family WhatsApp group is a question you have to actually talk to the person. She goes to brother, says, "Yo, bro, you hear what it's what Shai says? You hear what Moshe, our brother, did to his wife? He separated. Me and you also speak to God. Miriam was a prophetess, and Aaron was a prophet. We don't separate from our wives. We can still have a marriage and also be prophets. Who does Moshe think he is? So spiritual. He's separating from his wife." Miriam didn't agree with this. And the talk of the Rebbe, why Miriam didn't agree that a holy person should be separated from his wife. Miriam was actually making a protest. But let's not go there now because it's not the point of tonight's discussion. The point of the discussion is that Miriam speaks negative about her brother Moshe for having separated from his wife Tziporah. It was negative. She was criticizing what her brother did. She was criticizing. Now that I told you the whole story, we're going to read the text. And you're going to see things in the text you never would, you're still not going to understand it, but you have a clue a little bit. So let's see now we're going to go to the book of Numbers, chapter 12. Chapter 12, so it tells us that Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses regarding the Cushite woman he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. First of all, what does Cush mean? Not Yiddish. In Yiddish, Cush is like, kiss me, whatever. But in Hebrew, it sounds derogatory. A Cushite, it's not derogatory, but it means a black woman. Cushi was Ethiopian, a Midianite. Cushi was from the land of Cush. Cush was like Ethiopia, Africa. An African woman, a black woman, a dark-skinned woman. So it was his wife. So why is the Torah describing the wife of Moshe as a Cushite woman, which means a dark-skinned African woman? And not only that, it's not once in the verse, but twice in the verse. Look at the verse. They're talking about the Cushite woman he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. Like, just said the same thing twice, right? So let's see how Rashi explains the Cushite woman. Moshe's wife was a Midianite, not a Cushite. But the scripture is telling us that everyone acknowledged her beauty, just as everyone acknowledges a Cushite's blackness. Let me explain something very important in Torah before I go further. There's a concept of not saying things explicitly in Torah. When we have, for example, a person who's blind, in the Talmud it's called Sagi Nahar, a person who has very good eyesight. It's a euphemism. Instead of saying a negative, the Torah avoids, for those who saw the Living Torah this past Sunday, the Torah avoids using negative language. The most famous example is when Noah got animals into the ark. So he gathered the animals, 7 of the animals that were pure, and 2 of the animals that were not pure. Asher Lo tahora, that were not pure. It could have just said tamei, impure. But the Torah doesn't want to call an animal impure. So it says an animal that is not pure. If you listen to the way the Rebbe would speak, very often they would say, you have good and the opposite of good. He wouldn't say the word bad. The opposite of good. Many, many, many examples like this. For another famous example is, what's the Hebrew word for a cemetery? And you know how you say a cemetery in Hebrew? No. Doesn't say in modern Hebrew, maybe. In halacha, in Torah. What's the cemetery called? Beit HaChaim. It's called the house of the living. It's a cemetery. Cemetery. Part of my unveiling speech, whatever. But a Beit HaChaim means a house of the living. We describe a cemetery as a Beit HaChaim, as a house of living, because we don't say a house of dead people. That's derogatory. So we use a euphemism to describe it in a different way. So too, when the Torah wants to describe the beauty of this woman, so instead of saying explicitly she was a very beautiful, drop-dead, gorgeous, model, instead the Torah hides her beauty in a way of saying a kushis, just like the darkness of a dark-skinned woman is obvious, and everyone can acknowledge it, and it's undebatable. Meaning sometimes you can debate if someone's beautiful or not. Beauty's in the eyes of the beholder. Some people, it's unquestionable. Everyone agrees that this person is beautiful. So she was like a Cushite that everyone acknowledged her beauty, just as everyone acknowledges a Cushite's blackness. Now, in case you don't believe that that's what the Torah is saying, so the next Rashi proves it. How does he prove it? If you look at the numerical value, we know in Hebrew every single letter also has a number. So the word Kushis is 4 Hebrew letters. Look at the next Rashi. Kushis is Kaf is 20, Shin is 300, Yud is 10, and 400. So what does that equal? 736, which is the same numerical value as the word Yifat Mara, beautiful in appearance. So instead of saying Yifat Mara, which would be explicitly describing the beauty of Moshe's wife, instead the Torah uses a different word with the same numerical value, where the letters add up to the same number, but saying something that's the opposite to reflect that she was undeniably beautiful, and so beautiful that she stuck out. She stuck out. Meaning a dark-skinned woman would stick out amongst light-skinned women. Her beauty stuck out amongst everyone else. That's how strong her beauty stuck out. Okay. Then it continues. So the Torah said they were speaking regarding the Cushite woman he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. Why is he repeating it? Talking about Tziporah, but why is he repeating it? So what does this apparently superfluous clause mean to say? So Rashi tells us that you could find a woman beautiful in appearance, but that's all it is. She's a beautiful vessel, but get to know her a little bit, she's a ... Yeah, she's unpleasant indeed. You can find a woman that's pleasant indeed, but they're not so beautiful in body. This one, however, was pleasant in every respect, and that's why she was called the Cushite, the Ethiopian, on account of her beauty, as a man would call his handsome son Kusha to negate the power of the evil eye. Meaning, there's two things here. If she was just externally beautiful, the Torah would say she was beautiful. If she was only of good deeds, the Torah would say. But here she was beautiful both inside and outside. So to avoid the evil eye, Torah kind of hides her undeniable beauty that made her stick out from everybody else, and to prevent the evil eye because of her beauty, Torah would say the beautiful woman that Moshe married, and that Moshe is not being intimate with this beautiful woman he married. Instead, Torah is telling us the dark-skinned woman he had married to tell you that she was beautiful, but in a non-ostentatious way, they'll bring an evil eye. But why did we didn't answer the question? Why did I say twice he had married the woman he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman? So here comes the kicker. He had married a Cushite woman, but now he had divorced her. But Torah repeating to you that he had married her, Torah is specifying he had in the past married her, and that's what they were talking about, the fact that he was no longer married to her, he had divorced her. And yeah, he separated from her. I don't think he gave her a divorce, but they separated. Here it says divorce. V'ata gersha, that's the Hebrew words. And they said that the Lord spoke only to Moses, hasn't he spoken to us too? And the Lord heard them talking about Moshe, and the Lord's very upset, and that's how Miriam gets this Saras plague, etc., etc. Anyway, why am I sharing it? I mean, the Torah tells it. But what's the story? What's the message over here? No, that's Miriam. We're talking about Tziporah. What does this tell us about Tziporah? She was what? She was very loyal. She was very beautiful, and it did nothing for her. She was very lonely. All of her beauty, she was kept hidden to be protected from the evil eye. And who knew about her? Nobody. Moshe himself doesn't spend time with her. Moshe himself is not intimate with her because Moshe is busy with the Jewish people. Moshe is busy with God. Moshe is busy bringing God to the world. Moshe is busy bringing the Jews to God. And because Moshe's whole life is focused on his mission as the teacher of the Jewish people, as a conduit between God and the Jewish people, his own personal marriage is completely abandoned. He sacrifices his own marriage to a beautiful woman, beautiful in every respect, inside and outside. He sacrifices that personal happiness that he could have had for the sake of his people. Correct. So he sacrificed. So that's thank you. I didn't say it the right way. He sacrificed it, but she, the hero we're talking about today, is Tziporah. She accepts it. She's the real hero. She's the one. No, you're right. That's really what I want to talk about. The real hero here is not Moshe, because Moshe. No, you're feeling. No, but so here's what I want to say to you. No, she's right. That's exactly what I was going to say right now. Moshe is a tremendous man of sacrifice, giving up his personal bliss for the people. However, Moshe is not, he's giving something up, but he's getting something in return. He's getting heroism. He's getting world-known acclaim. He's getting eternal, memorial among the Jewish people. He's getting this tremendous spiritual revelation from God. He's experiencing tremendous spiritual elevation that no other person would ever in human history talk to God face to face the way God talked to Moshe. So Moshe is getting something out of this. Who's really making the sacrifice? Tziporah. What is Tziporah getting? Nothing. Not only is Tziporah not getting anything, no one even knows what she's giving up. There's two steps here. One is she's sacrificing. She's giving up her husband for the Jewish people. She's not telling, but she is, in effect, saying to the Jewish people, I am allowing your needs to supersede my needs. I'm allowing you to have my husband because he can do for you what no one else can do, even though that means that I lose a husband. But, second, not only is she doing that, not only is she sacrificing her husband, no one even appreciates the sacrifice she's making. No one even realizes what it is that she's giving up. No one knows what's happening. No one knows that's behind closed doors, that Moshe has separated from her so he can always be ready for God to speak to him. So it's one thing to make a sacrifice, at least people know you're a martyr. Come, they praise you as a martyr. It's something. To be a martyr, no one knows that you're that's, as Amy is saying, Tziporah is the real hero. That's the real act of heroism. To be a hero, when people know you're a hero, but okay, there's a limit to the heroism. The ultimate act of sacrifice is when no one even knows that there's a sacrifice. So what does it make of? It makes me think of three people. I'm thinking of three examples of this. The first, which was really about before, is the Rebbetzin, the Rebbe's wife. Do you know that the Rebbe's wife, we all know about the Rebbe. Everyone knows about the Rebbe, his absolute dedication, commitment, and loyalty to the Jewish people, to be there for the Jews day and night. And I can spend 1,000 hours talking about the levels of dedication, phone calls during the night, the Farbrengens. And what about his wife? She gave up her husband for the Jewish people. In fact, we're coming to the day when the Rebbe officially accepted the leadership of Chabad after a whole year of refusing to be the leader. After the previous Rebbe passed away in January of 1950, and people were begging the Rebbe he was then the son-in-law of the previous Rebbe, they were begging him to take the leadership role, to become the new leader of Chabad. He refused. He didn't want it. He wanted to be a shepherd in Midian, tending to his sheep, learning, studying, meditating, living a spiritual life in privacy without distraction. And it's said that one of the reasons why he eventually agreed to do it is because the Rebbe and his wife told him that if you won't take the leadership, all the work of my father will be in vain. And when he heard that, he couldn't refuse, and that's when he accepted to be the leader. And she would wait up, he would do private meetings till 3, 4 in the morning, 3 nights a week, till he had his heart attack and all that in the 70s. But for 30 years, from 1950 to 1978, she would wait up till 3, 4, 5, sometimes 6 o'clock in the morning. He'd be in 770. When he would come home, she'd be up waiting for him to greet him when he came home and to give him supper and to be with him. Who knew about her? Nobody. No one knew what she looked like. She wouldn't come to shul. She didn't want any of the fanfare. She didn't want them to give her a seat in the front. She didn't go to the Farbrengen. She didn't want people to look at her, to make a space for her. She didn't want it. And so she sat in her home. It's more than that. It's an act of absolute sacrifice where not only is she sacrificing everything she has for the Jewish people for somebody else, it's a sacrifice that people don't even know about. So on that level, not exactly the level, on that vein, I think about my own wife, about Chana. So I get to be here teaching, inspiring, sharing all these beautiful ideas. And it's beautiful, it's exciting, and I love it. And my wife is home doing bedtime all by herself. So it's the same thing. The wife of the rabbi, the Rebbitzin, is the unsung hero behind every great man, is even greater woman, is the unsung hero who's home. She's not giving the class and getting the credit and sharing wisdom. What's she doing? She's fighting with kids to get into bed, right? I'm saying it's not so glorious and not so exciting and not so spiritual and uplifting and feel good about yourself. And she can say no. And then I start another class on Wednesday night, right? And 3 nights a week and 4 nights a week and every night of the week and out and busy. And yet what is Tziporah? What is true sacrifice? Not just that she sacrifices her husband not being home almost every night of the week, but most people have their husbands home to help with bedtime and all that. But no one realizes, no one appreciates, no one sees the sacrifice that goes into having your husband not be home all day. I came home, I was in Orbi meetings, whatever. Come home, ran to Shiva home tonight. So I was home during Tziporah, and I came back for about an hour, and I left again. You're a rabbi. Yeah, so I'm the rabbi. So for me, it's exciting. I love being the rabbi. But for me, the sacrifice of being a rabbi is not such a big sacrifice. There's sacrifice sometimes, but at least everyone sees it. So my ego gets, But for my wife, it's the ultimate sacrifice. It's the ultimate sacrifice because it's a sacrifice that's not even seen, that no one knows about. It's a sacrifice that's happening behind closed doors, where nobody sees and nobody knows. I'm going to give you another modern day example of this. Think about this today. So every one of us are praying for the soldiers in Gaza. We're praying and we're thinking and we're sending food packages and we're sending this and we're going to send money for to make outside Gaza. They already raised all the money. They don't need anymore, but they set up now grassroots organizations, different ones doing different things, right outside the border of Gaza, where soldiers can go for a few hours when they have they're not on leave, but they can go to rest, to go get a hot shower, to go get a massage. I have massage therapists there massaging the soldiers. So everyone's worried and praying and concerned for the soldiers. And they're heroes. They're heroes that deserve our prayers and our thoughts, absolutely. But what about their wives? You have these reservists who they're fighting on the front lines, and we're all paying attention to them and listening. And then you have their wife that's back home doing bedtime, trying to go to sleep in an empty bedroom where she probably takes hours to fall asleep, thinking and worrying and imagining what is her husband doing at that very moment, which building is he in, what fight is he fighting, what's going on. So all your mind starts to imagine and you can't sleep. And so in Israel right now, we have literally tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of wives of soldiers that are the unsung heroes whose sacrifice is not going to be noted, it's not going to be memorialized, not going to be on a statue or on a plaque anywhere, not going to get a ribbon. That's a true sacrifice. It's the sacrifice that's not so obvious, but it's a greater sacrifice that takes place in secret. One of the greatest heroes of the Jewish people is this woman that makes one of the greatest sacrifices a person can make. And not like a one-day sacrifice. That's a day after day for a lifetime sacrifice that no one even knows. It's a sacrifice that's none of the Jews ever appreciated the sacrifice Tziporah made for them. None. And yet she did it anyway. She did it anyway. So I can tell you something very personal. I'll give you any details. So I was thinking about this whole Shabbos. Now my wife and I are having a discussion about me going to do something. There'll be a sacrifice for me to go do it. For somebody else, another family that's part of the community, but on the periphery. And my wife said to me, for her, it's even a bigger sacrifice than for me to do it, because I'm going to be gone a whole entire day if I'm going to go to do this thing. And they won't even appreciate it. Will they even appreciate that you went, that you did? And the truth is, probably not. have to be honest enough to recognize that not everyone always appreciates that. Oh, look, the rabbi's here, and the whole world turns over, and everyone stands up, and So whatever, I have a healthy ego, but also I can understand that she's probably right, and probably I won't be appreciated. So that I made a sacrifice to go, and then my wife made an even bigger sacrifice for me to go for sure. They're not going to know that there was a sacrifice. They might not even appreciate my presence. On the other hand, it's a mitzvah to go, and the family needs it, and it's really a mitzvah, whatever. So I'm probably going to go anyway. But this is the sacrifice that's made where nobody knows. The true sacrifice is to do a mitzvah, nobody knows. Okay, so for us. So what if we're not married to the rabbi, and we're not married to an Israeli soldier, or we're not married to Moshe Rabbeinu, and so we're not sacrificing our husband or our child or our spouse, and we're living a normal life. We don't have to sacrifice on a day-to-day basis, and we don't have to give up our marital happiness or give up our home and make a sacrifice of that kind of proportion of Tziporah. How could Tziporah still be relevant to us in our lives? To every one of us. How can we live like Tziporah a little bit? Every person has opportunities to do for someone else without anybody knowing. Normally we want people to know what we're doing. Right? You do a whole end of the year matching campaign, there's a whole thing, everyone should see, it's on the web, that's why it works. Everyone sees it, there's a campaign, and there's a website, and you can see who gave and how much they gave and who's it matches. And it's exciting. That's the way it works in the world. And that's normal human behavior. Human beings one of our needs is to be recognized and validated for our actions, for our efforts. It's a healthy human need. And there's nothing wrong with having that human need. Yet Tziporah was able to transcend that human need and to be able to recognize that I have to give for someone else and be willing to sacrifice for someone else, even when they won't appreciate the sacrifice, even when they won't even know that I made a sacrifice. And that's the greatest act of heroism. That's the greatest kind of mitzvah. The greatest form of charity is to give charity when nobody even knows. When nobody even knows. And so with that, even though it's already after 9 o'clock, but you have time for a good story, right? I thought you would have time for a good story. I said it as a kiddish, I don't know, maybe half a year ago. I said it not too long ago, but it's more or less, not all you were there. Most of you were there. We have a beautiful crowd watching us online. So I'll share the story, guys. It's a beautiful story. It's a beautiful story. Here's the whole story. Part of it's relevant to what I'm talking about. I'll tell you the whole story. So there was a rabbi, he passed away. His name was Rabbi Emanuel Shachat. Brilliant man. Listened to many of his tapes. Part of a brilliant family. He was very well versed in the New Testament. It's a whole story how we got into it. He would actually debate with priests, and he was very active in saving Jews from Jews for Jews for Jay and all that. Many, many stories. He was very well known in the theological world. One day he gets an invitation to present the Jewish theory or Jewish viewpoint on charity at a conference of priests. Not to debate Christianity, because it wasn't not to debate, but to present to priests that are in there, they're having a whole conference, to be a keynote speaker, to give a Jewish perspective. So if you have a chance to teach Judaism to the world, there's a mitzvah. On the other hand, to go to priests and so he wasn't sure if he should take the invitation to go speak at this conference of priests, hundreds of priests from across the country, maybe one of the keynote addresses. So he sent this invitation to the Rebbe, asking if actually he should accept the invitation to present at this 2-day or 3-day conference or something, and to do a whole workshop on Judaism and charity and all that. So the Rebbe responded to the request, to the letter, giving him a blessing that he should go to speak. He should speak to the priests and educate them what Judaism says. And the Rebbe wrote him even what to say. They were told him we should talk about the Jewish value of giving charity in secret. There's this value, we know in Judaism there's different levels of charity. To give with a smile, you give and they don't know who's getting. We don't know who you're giving to, and then when people who get it don't know who's giving. The highest is to give in secret, that no one knows that you don't know who you gave to, and those you gave to don't know who it came from. So to talk about this idea, and the Rebbe told them, and you can share the story of the Taisis Yom Tov. Who is the Taisis Yom Tov? There was a rabbi that lived in Krakow, Poland, who was actually the great-great-grandfather of Rabbi Emanuel Shachat. He's a descendant of this rabbi, who wrote a very famous commentary on the Mishnah. And basically, I'll tell you the story in a minute. And the Rebbe told him to share the story of his great-great-grandfather and the value and the power of giving charity in secret at this conference, which is exactly what he did. He comes to the conference, he presented 2-3 hours on charity, and he went through the different stages of charity, and he talked about the value in Judaism of giving charity in secret, and he shared the following story about his own great-great-grandfather. His great-great-grandfather, the Tosas Yom Tov, was a rabbi, I believe, in the city of Krakow. Paul, I believe that was the city it was. I may be wrong, one of the big cities. Very big city, there's a well-known rabbi. And in the city, whatever, like everything else, life was good. There was a miser that lived in the city. A miser who was like the most despised person in town. He was a rich person, but he wouldn't give a penny to any of the charity causes. They're having a building campaign, not even $18, nothing, not even a leaf on the wall, nothing. The high holidays, bidding for Ali, he didn't bid for anything, he didn't buy anything, he didn't give. He never gave money for everything. And in fact, when he died, they buried him in the outskirts of the, because then, let's say today you buy a plot. Then the Chevra Kadisha buried you, and there's a cemetery owned by the community, they will bury you. More important people got more prestigious spots, and he was an outcast. He was despised by the community for his lack of, he was very wealthy. He never gave to anything. Anyone ever came to him, didn't give. People know to go to the edge of the very last row of the cemetery. Anyway, that Friday, all of a sudden the rabbi's in his studies, preparing his sermon or whatever he's doing, he's learning, and then comes an old woman and says, "Rabbi, I need help. I need money for Shabbos." Okay, woman's money. Okay, old woman, a widow. He gives her opens his desk, takes the money, gives her money for Shabbos. 10 minutes later, another person comes in. This guy was a cripple. "Rabbi, I can't buy any food for Shabbos. I need food for Shabbos." Okay? He takes whatever money he had left, he gives to the next person. 10 minutes later, a third person comes in. This guy lost his job. He's a low yutzlach. The guy, has no, could never make anything happen. The guy was out of a job. Like what's going on? So every week I go to the baker, and the baker gives me credit. And this guy, the fish market gives me credit, and I pay when I have a little bit of money. They all give me credit. Something they give it to me for free, and they wipe off my credit. This week, I went yesterday shopping. Nobody gave me credit. Not the baker, not the fisherman, not the butcher, not the fruit event. Nobody would give me any credit. Strange. Okay, so he gives him some money. 10 minutes later, in comes there's another widow, and then comes this person, and comes a guy with 10 kids. So there's a line out the door of people that need help with food for Shabbos. He says, "What's going on?" Last week, and everyone tells him the same story. Last week I went to the fisherman, and he gave me. I had a little bit of money. He said, "Okay, the rest of pay me on credit." And once a month I go, and he pays. Now he says, "No more credit." He said, "The credit is closed. He's not doing credit." And I went to the baker. The same thing. The baker said, "I'm not doing credit anymore. For the last 10 years, he's giving me credit. No more credit." So the rabbi says, "This is crazy." He goes, it's almost Shabbos, and there's a line out of his door. People don't have food for Shabbos. He goes running to the baker, to the butcher, says, "What's going on?" So finally they tell him, "We have no choice. We have to tell you. For years and years and years, this miser that was buried 2 days ago on the edge of the town would come to us every few weeks and ask to see all of our credits. All the people that were behind on payments, all the people that couldn't afford to buy food. They went shopping, and he would give us all the money, pay off all the credit that was owed, but on condition we swore never to tell anyone why we wrote it off." So the people thought that who was a generous one? The butcher, the baker. They thought, "The baker's so kind, gives me credit, they don't care. They're making enough money, they don't care, and they give me credit." And then they were always happy. They always, "Thank you, Mr. Baker, for giving me credit. You're behind, okay, don't worry about it, I'll wipe it off." But really, we were getting paid for everything. That's why we didn't care. Once a month he would come, whatever was owed, he gave us full cash. But we made it swear that we can't tell anyone. Now he's dead. We're not doing it anymore. We don't know if this is going to continue. We're not doing credit like this, like just giving everyone free food. And all of a sudden, Tosas Yom Tov realized what a tragedy had happened. The greatest Baal Chesed, the greatest act, the greatest guy who gave charity in the community was the guy that everyone made fun of, that everyone despised, that everyone thought was a low charity, was actually single-handedly supporting all the poor of the city, and nobody even knew about it. Heaven knows. So Taisus Yom Tov said, not in the story, the Taisus Yom Tov said, if that's the case, how are we going to make it up to this guy? How are we going to make it up? So he said, I want to be buried next to this person. When I pass away, make my burial spot right next to him. He deserves that I should be buried next to him. And if I'm going to be buried, then I'll become like the new center of the town. You know, so that'll be like the new center of the cemetery where the rabbi is buried. So I want to be buried right over there, and that will become the new center of the cemetery. And sure enough, Taisus Yom Tov is buried. This is, he said in his speech, Rabbi Shachat, the rabbi of Krakow was buried next to this Jew that would give charity in secret. And that was a speech. Round of applause. Everyone loved it. He goes to his hotel room, knock on the door, and there's a priest that's knocking on the door. He says, could you tell me that story again? You said a story. It was a fascinating story about this Jew that was very cheap and that was a miser. So, okay. So Rabbi Shachat repeats the whole story to him. He just asks him questions about it. He says, tell it to me again, whatever. So I was like, okay, what's the deal? So I have to say the story a third time. He says to him, you should know that actually, even though I'm a priest, my mother's a Jew. I come from a Jewish family. I don't know anything about Judaism. But I know there's a story that's passed on in the family that we had a great-great-grandfather who was very, very generous, but was a secret giver. And nobody ever knew of his generosity, of his kindness, until after he passed away, the whole town found out what kind of a generous person he was. And then, as a result of that, the rabbi of the town was buried next to him. And I think that the story you're saying is about my great-great-grandfather. Rabbi Shachat is telling the story of his great-great-grandfather buried next to this priest's great-great-grandfather. The whole next day, instead of being by the conference, this guy was sitting with Rabbi Shachat and asking questions about Judaism, asking questions. He had a million questions to ask Rabbi Shachat. Rabbi Shachat left. And I said, they'll stay in touch, but kind of they lost touch. They lost touch. A few years later, Rabbi Shachat was in Israel. He's by the Western Wall. And the guy comes over and taps him on the shoulder. A guy with a beard, looks like a rabbi, and saying with a white shirt and all that. He says, you recognize me? Shachat, no. He says, I was that priest that you met in that conference, wherever it was, in Buffalo. I don't know where it was. I think in Buffalo. And after that was couldn't find peace. I had to go to Israel to go study in yeshiva. Now I'm a religious man studying in yeshiva, etc. That's the power of giving charity in secret. Anyway, back to us and back to Tziporah, back to the heroine of this week's Torah reading. The ultimate hero is not Moshe. Moshe was a man of tremendous sacrifice. But we know about his sacrifice. We appreciate his sacrifice. We memorialize his sacrifice. Tziporah is a woman that made a sacrifice and nobody ever knew about it. Nobody ever saw her. Nobody ever thanked her. Nobody ever gave her a plaque. Nobody even knew about it to thank her. And that's the ultimate sacrifice that Tziporah made for the Jewish people. Okay, my friends. Thank you, Joe. I'm glad you enjoyed. Thank you, Faith. I hope everyone enjoyed. Laila Tov, and Laila Tov.